welcome everybody. Today I'm going to talk about just one activity. It's called the Link Skills activity, and there are two reasons for focusing on this activity. One is because it's an activity I like a lot because it sets up very good conditions for vocabulary learning. And it's also because we can use this activity to look at the conditions which are really important for language learning. And so when we do this, you sort of need to have two things in mind. One is how to make link skills activities and how to use them in class. And then the second thing to think about is what features the activity puts into practice which really help vocabulary learning, and how you can make sure that these features are present in other activities as well. So then let's now move on then to look at the linked skills activity. Oops. Okay. So the linked skills activity is quite simple. In this activity, the learners work on exactly the same material 3 times, but they do it each time through a different one of the 4 skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So, for example, they read some material, then they listen to it, and then the third step in this example would be they then write about it. So then you have a sequence of read, listen, and write. So the linked skills activity, in a way, is like 3 smaller activities joined together, but they all focus on exactly the same content material. Okay, now let's look at an example of the linked skills activity. So in this one, the learners read some questions without seeing the text that the questions are based on. And they try to guess the answers to the questions even though they can't see the text. So when the teacher makes the questions, it's not a bad idea to put a few little hints into the questions, make the questions fairly guided. But the idea is, before listening to the text, the learners read the questions and then think, what might the answer to this question be? The second step of the activity is to actually listen to the text. And then they check or correct or put in their answers to the questions that they hear after the text. So the idea then is now they can see if their guesses were correct or not. And the third part of the activity is that they work in pairs, and then they compare the differences between their answers and the right answers and discuss them with their partner in the pairs. So you see the same piece of content is worked on 3 times, but in 3 different skills: the skill of reading first, the skill of listening, and then the skill of speaking. So now let's look at another example. In this example, the learners read the text first. So they get the text and they just sit there and quietly read it. And then they listen to the questions. So the questions are not written, but they hear the questions, and then they write the answers to them. Now, when they write the answers, they can be trying to recall what they read at the first step in the text. And so this is really a mixture of 2 skills of listen and write. And then the third step is, because the text that they were reading is about storing food, and they've now really understood that text by reading it and answering questions, then they try to write some brief guidelines for storing food safely. So this is a writing activity. So really we have the 3 steps of read, listen, and write. Let's look at another example. In this example, we're using exactly the same text again of food storage and things like that. And the first step is that they just the learners draw on their own experience and background knowledge. They can do this step either individually or in pairs, depending on their level of proficiency. So their first step is to write, and they write guidelines for storing food safely. And they draw on their own experience and background knowledge to make these guidelines. Step number 2, they compare their guidelines with each other or with another student in this case. So they work in pairs. And so they talk about their guidelines, and they might even make some changes if they wanted to, but they really just talk about them with each other. Now you can see that these first 2 steps are then preparing the learners for the third step in this one linked skills activity, where they then read the text and answer the questions. And because there's been a lot of background stimulation going on and a little bit of sharing with another student, when they come to read the text, they'll bring a lot of knowledge to the text. And so the text should be much easier to read than if they didn't have this previous preparation. So we've looked at 3 examples. If you have the handout for the activity, then you'll find there's another couple of examples there where learners, first of all, listen to the text being read to them by the teacher, and they can take notes. And then they write what they can remember about the text. So the second step then is to write what they can remember from the listening. And then the third step is to do a 4-3-2 activity on the content of the passage. And that means they just talk about the passage to a partner, and they've got 4 minutes to talk about it with one partner, 3 minutes to talk about it with another, and 2 minutes to talk about it with the third partner. So this is a sequence of listen, write, and speak. And the 5th example I've given on the handout is talk to a partner about what you know about good food storage procedures, so speak. Then they read the text and answer the questions, so that's reading. And then the third step is to either prepare and deliver a talk to your partner about good food storage procedures or the danger of not handling food correctly and carefully. So that's speak. So there we have speak, read, speak. So this is a little bit different from the other linked skills activities that we looked at, in that instead of there being 3 different skills, it begins with a speaking skill, it then focuses on the reading skill, and then it finishes with a speaking skill activity. Now, in a linked skills activity, all the 3 activities in a series should draw very strongly on the same piece of content material. This makes sure that the activities become easier as learners go through the series, and that the same vocabulary and grammatical structures are repeated during the series. So this is a real important feature of the linked skills activity. You focus on the same piece of content, but you do it 3 times. And the hope is that you get better each time you do it, so that when you come to the 3rd activity in the linked skills series, you're performing at quite a high level because of the preparation which has occurred during the first 2 steps of the activity. So now we're going to look at the conditions that help vocabulary learning from linked skills activities. And this has been one of my major focuses of interest in vocabulary for many years. The idea is that vocabulary learning doesn't occur through magic or anything like that. Vocabulary learning occurs because certain conditions which help learning occur. And this applies to both native speakers and non-native speakers. Native speakers learning their first language learn under the same sort of, making use of the same conditions that second language learners do. So let's look at these conditions. The first condition is repetition. There is really no learning without repetition. There's a couple of kinds of repetition. One kind of repetition is where you keep seeing the same material over and over again under the same sort of context and under the same conditions for learning. And the second kind of repetition is where the repetition is of the same vocabulary item, but it's a little bit different each time, in that the context of the word might be different, or the form of the word might be different. It might be singular rather than plural, and so on. But the first and most important condition for learning is repetition. And we can expand on that a little bit by really saying that the best repetition is spaced repetition. That is, where there is some gap between the repetitions. Now, the second, third, and fourth conditions really can be summarized by talking about the quality of attention which occurs during the repetition. So, in a way, if we want to really simplify these 4 points even more, we can say that there are really two things that matter most of all in learning vocabulary. One is repetition, and the other is the quality of mental processing when the repetition occurs. And retrieval, varied use, and deliberate attention are all ways of increasing the quality of attention. Now, retrieval involves meeting something that you've met before and having to make some recall of what you met before. Now, when people do extensive reading involves reading lots and lots of material. And if the material is at the right level for the learners, then the same unknown vocabulary will occur several times in the reading. Each time the learner meets the word again, there's an opportunity to retrieve or recall the meaning of that word. And each successful retrieval strengthens knowledge. The third condition for helping learning is varied use. And varied use is what I talked about just earlier, and that is retrieving or meeting the same item again, but in a slightly different way. And another reason then why extensive reading is good for learning is that when learners read, they meet the words again, but the words are in slightly different contexts. They're often in a slightly different form. They might be third person S rather than first person use of a verb, and so on. And these variations help the words stick in the memory. Another condition which helps learning is deliberate attention, and that is giving particular focus on that word and thinking about it as a word. So looking up a dictionary involves deliberate attention. Hearing an explanation from a teacher involves deliberate attention. Negotiating the meaning of a word with another classmate involves deliberate attention. So these conditions then are really important ones for vocabulary learning. They're actually important for any kind of learning, because in order to learn, we often have to meet the same things several times. Now, if we see a linked skills activity, how can we judge whether the linked skills activity is a good one or not? So if we design a linked skills activity, then the first question we should ask ourselves is, does the activity involve the same content and language through all the three parts of the activity? This is really important so that when learners do a linked skill activity, they are focusing on the same material, exactly the same material in 3 different skills. So that's the first thing to look at when you design an activity. The second thing is the activity well sequenced? That means, have we got the easiest part of the activity coming first? And is the goal of the activity, the learning goal we want, is that really represented by the third step of the activity? And the third condition is, does the activity set up good conditions for learning? So are there opportunities for repetition? Are there opportunities for retrieval and varied use and deliberate attention? When we look at whether an activity is well sequenced, it's quite useful to think, if you do a linked skills activity, what skill do you really want the learners to get the best practice in? If you're running a speaking class, then you would like then that the third step of the activity is a speaking activity. If you're running a reading class, then the third step of a linked skill activity should be a reading activity, because the third step in any activity of the linked skills activity series will be the one that the learners perform best at, because of the preparation which has occurred during the first 2 steps of the activity. So it's useful then, when designing the activity, to make sure that your third step is the one where you really want the most learning to occur and for learners to perform their best. You can see it as being the goal, the learning goal of the linked skill activity. Okay. So we imagine that then we've designed some linked skills activities, and we're going to look at how to design them in a minute. And now we're going to get the learners to actually, and we've checked them, I should say, too, by looking at our criteria for a good linked skill activity. And then when we use the linked skills activity, what should we look for when the learners are doing the activity? So the first thing, and this is with most learning activities, are the learners coping well with the activities? That means, are they at the right level for them, and are they able to do the activity with a high degree of success? We would expect the learners to cope most well in the last 2 steps of the series, and especially in the final step of the series. There could be a little bit of a struggle with the first step, but it should still be something that the learners can do successfully. There's been some interesting research on whether it's good that learners make mistakes when they do activities and learn from these mistakes. The research actually shows that it's not a great idea for the learners to make mistakes. If you can design and sequence your activities well so that the learners have minimal chances of making errors, you're going to get better learning. The second thing for looking at when you monitor a linked skills activity is, do the same language items keep recurring in each of the 3 activities? So this simply means, is the linked skill activity giving an opportunity for the repetition of vocabulary? The third thing to look for is, are the learners retrieving the target vocabulary in activities 2 and 3 in the series, rather than repeating them from the input sheet? Now, retrieval involves bringing back memory of what you met before. If you're simply seeing what was met before, that's not retrieval. But if you have to recall something of what you met before, then that's retrieval. So it's then important to see in steps 2 and 3 if the learners are actually doing retrievals. Step number 4. Do Do activities 2 and 3 involve creative use of the activity from activity 1? That really means varied use. So do activities 2 and 3 involve varied use of the vocabulary from activity 1? That is, are they using the vocabulary in a different way? One of the reasons for the linked skills activity involving 3 of the 4 language skills is that having to use the same word in a different skill is a way of making varied retrieval occur or creative use occur. So simply having to meet the word again through a new, or use a word again through a new skill, is providing some variation, and the variation helps learning. And the fifth thing to look at is, are the learners handling the content of the activity more confidently in the later steps? So is the series of 3 activities really giving them good support so that in the later parts of the activity, particularly in step 3, they're doing it quite well? And really they should be performing above their normal level of performance in step 3 of the activity because of the work that they've done in steps 1 and 2. Now, how do you make a linked skills activity? Linked skills activities sound very complicated, but in fact, they're really quite simple. Once you've made 2 or 3, they're really easy to make. The first step is to think about using a reading text as a starting point for the activity. That is, if you've got a text, sometimes with questions, but sometimes with not, that's a good point to see as your piece of content for using to help design the linked skill activity. You don't have to have a reading text. You can design a linked skills activity without a reading text, but it's really easy to design activities where you already have a text. The essence of the linked skills activity is dealing with the same content 3 times. And so the greater the similarity of the content in each of the activities, the better the learning opportunities. Now, one of the very simplest linked skills activities would simply be read the text, listen to the text, write about the text, or listen to the text, read the text, speak about the text. And this would be the simplest, or the most, how would you say, the least elaborated linked skill activity. And the content is exactly the same in each of the 3 steps of the activity, and this sets up good learning opportunities of repetition, opportunities for retrieval, and for varied use. If the final activity in the linked skills activity you're designing is a productive activity, that is, it's an activity involving speaking or writing, then having another productive activity in the series could raise performance on the final activity a bit more. So what this means, say you want your learners to improve their skill in writing. So you make writing the 3rd step of the activity. Now imagine you're working from a reading text, so you might get learners to read the reading text as the 1st step. Now what about the 2nd step? Well, writing is a productive activity. Speaking and writing are productive activities. Listening and reading are receptive activities. So in step 2, because your 3rd step is a productive activity, it's quite good to make your 2nd step a productive activity. In this case, it would have to be speaking, because having to produce the language gives a chance to learn some of the things which are involved and needed for production, so that when you come to the writing step, you're a bit closer to be able to write. So then if writing is the third step, then speaking would be a good second step and reading would be a good first step. The fourth guideline for making a linked skills activity is that the first activity should be reasonably easy for the learners to do. The reason for this is in the second and the third activity, the learners already have some practice with the content and with the language related to the content. But in the first activity, they're coming new to it. And so it's good if the first activity is something that they can do with a reasonably good chance of success without a lot of background knowledge. So when you design an activity then, think about, have you got a good order so that the first step is easy, the second step takes the learners as close as possible to the third step, and then the third activity then should be the learning goal of the linked skills activity. Oops. Now, we've now then seen some examples of linked skills activities, and we've looked at the conditions for learning, which will help in linked skills activities. We've also looked at when you monitor an activity, what are the things that you should be looking for, making sure that repetition occurs, making sure that the same content is focused on, making sure that the learners are able to complete the activity successfully. Now I want to move a bit more widely and look at linked skills activities in relation to course books. And we're coming back then to the two conditions, the two simplest conditions that I mentioned, which are really important for vocabulary learning, and that is spaced repetition and high quality of processing during each repetition. Now you can do a little bit of retrieval and think, now what does high quality processing mean? And high quality processing means having the opportunity to do retrieval, that is to recall what you did before, what you met before, having the opportunity to meet and retrieve the same material again, but under different circumstances. And another high quality condition is giving some deliberate attention to the items which you want learners to learn. Now, course books usually don't include enough repetition. And it's important then, if we want learning to occur, that we can try and build some repetition into a course book. So now we're going to look at one of the ways of doing that. Now, as I mentioned before, revisiting material can involve verbatim repetition, and that is repetition in exactly the same form of which the original meeting occurred. And revisiting can involve varied repetition, that is, meeting the same material under different conditions. Oops. Now, I think that in a course book, the really important activities in the course book should be visited at least 5 times during the course, using a mixture of verbatim and varied repetitions. Now, if we want to make these revisitings of the course book like linked skills activities, then it's useful to think that how can we vary the meetings of the same material so that the learners have an opportunity to work on it again, but in a slightly different way. Now, I think that about 1/3 of the time in a language course should be spent working on material in the course book that the learners have already met before. So that means turning these activities into kinds of linked skills activities, but not which occur one after the other, but which occur on different days during the use of the course book. So let's take an example. Imagine that you do an activity which involves a reading text in the course book. And then you, about a week later, you think, now it would be good to go back to that activity and deal with it again. Now, you might then be able to use a verbatim repetition and simply go back to that same activity earlier in the course book and say, now I want you to read this again, but this time try to read it as quickly as you can. And so this is a verbatim repetition because it's exactly the same text, but this time they have a little challenge to see if they can do it faster. And then on another day, maybe a week later or 2 weeks later, the teacher might use the same reading text again, but as a listening activity. And so then the learners hear the material that they read before. They don't see the written text in front of them, but they listen to it and may have to answer some questions or do something like that. And then 3 or 4 weeks later, the teacher should go back to the same activity again and then say, okay, now we've listened to this text, we've read the text before, so now let's talk about that text. And so the material then in the course book is visited for the 4th time, but this time using the skill of speaking. Now, in any lesson, the old material in the lesson is much more important than any new material in the lesson. Teacher trainers often make a great fuss about a presentation and how the initial presentation of a text or some material is important. I don't think it's important. The first meeting with material is really only the first step on a long journey to learning the language which is in that material. And so the first meeting of a piece of material and the first work on a particular activity is only this first step. And so it should be done well, and it's always good to do it well. But the most important parts of any lesson are when the old material comes back again. And these parts are really important because the old material is getting closer and closer to being learnt and remembered. And eventually you want to reach the point where the old material then becomes part of permanent knowledge. So I recommended that about a third of the time in the language course should be spent going back to the old activities that have been done earlier in the course and doing them again, but doing them as if they were linked skills activities in the sense of doing them again, but in a slightly different way. Turning reading into speaking, turning listening into reading, speaking becomes writing. You can see it's not difficult to make variations in this way. But repetition is really a very, very important condition for learning. And spaced, varied repetition is the best kind of repetition you can do. It's good to have verbatim repetition because verbatim repetition helps learn particular set forms and so on. But varied repetition adds something a little bit more to the knowledge and enriches the knowledge. Now, I hope that you can see that this idea of going back and revisiting the old material in a course book several times is in many ways like turning the old activities into linked skills activities. That is, you deal with exactly the same content, but you deal with it in a slightly different way. So that's really most of what I have to say. What I want you to take away from this talk is First of all, the conditions that help learning, the conditions of repetition, the conditions of retrieval, the conditions of varied meetings and varied use, and the conditions of deliberate attention. In the linked skills activities, I haven't really included deliberate attention. I would call deliberate attention language-focused learning because one of the 4 strands of a well-balanced language course is the strand of language-focused learning. But I like to use linked skills activities to focus more on the skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. That is meaning-focused input and meaning-focused output and fluency development. But it is possible to make one of the steps in the linked skills activity deliberate attention. The main reason I haven't included deliberate attention in my examples of linked skills activities is I think a lot of deliberate attention goes on in the classroom anyway, and I don't really want to increase that. I would rather increase the amount of meaning-focused input, meaning-focused output, and fluency development. And so I like to limit linked skills activities to the 4 skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. If I was going to be sent away to a desert island and I could only take one teaching activity with me, then the linked skills activity would be the teaching technique I would take. I recommend it highly to you. If you want to find out more about it, then you can get hold of the book, What Should Every ESL Teacher Know? This book is free and it's available from the Compass Publishing website. And chapter 15 is completely about linked skills activities. Much of the material that I've presented today comes from this chapter. I'd also like to recommend another book, and this is the book, What Should Every EFL Teacher Know? I've written many books during my lifetime as an academic, but this book is the one that I feel most satisfied about. After almost 50 years in the language teaching and teacher training profession, I thought I should be able to sit down and draw on my experience and all the reading and research that I've done to give recommendations to teachers of English as a foreign language. And so I did that. The book actually only took me about 3 weeks to write, although I was working quite hard each day, but it was work that I enjoyed. And so in this book, What Should Every EFL Teacher Know? I've tried to include what I think are the most important things to know about teaching English as a foreign language. And I was quite happy with what I've done. The book is not expensive. One of the conditions that I applied to the publisher when publishing the book is that it should be cheap enough for teachers to buy easily. You can buy this book in electronic form or in hard copy. You can get it through Amazon in electronic form. I don't make any more money from this book because they made me a payment before I wrote the book, and I haven't sold enough copies. They haven't sold enough copies to pay me any more royalties. So I'm not looking for money. I'm just recommending that this, if you want to get in a very simple way, the things which are really important for teaching, this is a place to look. Now, I'm quite happy to handle any questions that you want to give. Thank you for your patience during this talk. And can I pass you back to the coordinator now?
All right, thank you, Paul. Yeah, we do have some questions that were written in the chat and our Q&A box here. So I'm going to read you a few questions for you.
I'll see if I can find them. Let me see if I can find them. Oops.
Yeah, so there was one in the chat earlier, so let me get to this one first. Okay. So they said linked skills activities give teachers a way to create a variety of activities. However, I've generally been using reading for speed and fluency with the same routine, and I think students quite like doing the same routine. What advice would Dr. Nation offer for getting a balance between establishing a routine and changing it up in a bi-weekly 15-week reading class? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm not a doctor, so I'm I started a doctorate and never finished it, but I've helped a lot of people get their doctorates. So we'll put that right. I think routines are good because routines provide an organization for the classroom. The learners know what they have to do, and they should know how to go about it. So I'm all in favor of routines. I think the teacher can introduce some variety into routines, as I've suggested with the linked skills activity. One of the values of routines is that, as I said, the learners know what to do. I would also add a little bit more to that. I think that learners should understand not only what to do, but they should understand why they are doing something. And this is why I've given special attention, for example, to the conditions for learning, to the importance of repetition, for the importance of spaced repetition, the importance of retrieval, the importance of varied use. And I think learners should understand these principles of learning. So I would add to what the questioner has described by saying it's good to have a set routine, and it's also good for the learners to understand what are the principles which lie behind this set routine. There's a true story that I like. A few years ago, while working outside around my piece of land, you can probably see a little bit through the window in the back, I fell down and I hurt my shoulder a little bit. So I went to a physiotherapist, and the physiotherapist, he said, yeah, we can do some exercises to help fix your shoulder. And so we got talking, and he asked me where I came from, and I told him my hometown, which is a very small town. And he said, oh, I have a friend from there. And it turned out that his friend was my nephew. And then he started to tell me about my nephew and the physiotherapist used to work together for telecom. And he said he went to one of his telecom courses, which they had to do regular courses about, the telecom technology and so on. And in one of the courses, one of the teachers said, look, here are the things I want you to learn, but here are some ways in which you can learn them. And the teacher gave them a few little bits of guidance about how to go about learning. The pieces of guidance, I think, were not particularly good. They were okay. They were things like write something on a Post-it note and stick it in front of you so that when you go to the toilet, you will see it. And when you're sitting in the bath, you will see it. And when you do cooking, you will see it. And sort of things like that. And anyway, the person who was to become a physiotherapist sort of took us on board, and he did it. And he said, when I was at secondary school, I thought I was dumb because I wasn't very good at learning. And then this teacher showed me some things to help learning, and I did really well in those courses. So as a result, he thought, I've always wanted to be a physiotherapist, and now I think I'm clever enough, I'll go and do a course. And he did. And now he is one of the top physiotherapists in New Zealand. Now, that's because his teacher not only taught him, but his teacher also gave him some training in how to learn. So I think this is really important. You can have set routines, and that's great. And I think it's a good idea. But I also think it's really important to add why you are doing these things and how they help learning. The conditions I've described today are for learning vocabulary, but they help the learning of anything, learning people's names, remembering content you have read, and so on. These same conditions of repetition and quality of processing are important. Sorry, that was a long answer to a short question, but that's the trouble with me.
Okay, so we're going through. Thank you for the answer there. We have one from Tim Pritchard here. He was looking at your handout, so I think this question might be good for everyone. On page 3, the last page of the handout, under what are some other activities setting up similar learning conditions to linked skills?
Yeah.
He asks, can you explain what you mean by number 3, procedures?
Oh, yes. Oh, I couldn't have thought of a better question to ask myself. I'm glad you asked that, Tim. Okay. Procedures are things like this. Say you want your learners to do a ranking activity. And you can say, okay, here's a list of items and I want you to rank them according to some criteria. Now, that gets the activity done. But you can actually break that activity into a series of steps. And the series of steps I call a procedure. So one procedure which works well with ranking activities is the pyramid procedure. So let's take a typical activity such as you're lost on a desert island. You have to go from one end to the next. It's very hilly and lots of jungle. Here's a list of 15 things. You can only take 5. Which ones are you going to take? Well, the first step could be, step 1, simply look at the list by yourself and make your decision. Step number 2, work in pairs with your neighbor and try and reach agreement with your neighbor about the 5 things you should take with you. Step number 3, pairs join together to make a group of 4, groups of 4. And the group of 4 has to agree on the 5 things to take with them. And step number 4 is the whole class comes together with one representative from each group and they try to make a final decision for the whole class. So you now see that the rather simple ranking activity has actually been turned into a procedure, in this case the pyramid procedure of starting with individual work, moving to pair work, moving to small group work, and then moving to the whole class. And exactly the same material is focused on in each step of the activity, like the linked skills activity. Now, in the book, I went on and on about it. Sounds like I was trying to make money, but I wasn't. There's a section on procedures in there, and it simply involves looking at how you can take an activity and break it into steps so that there's opportunity to revisit the same material several times at each step during the activity.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, we'll have a few more questions here. We have one that says, as the sequences of linked skills activities are varied, as you mentioned, can teachers use them for the low proficiency students? Any scaffolding for students?
I think that a teacher should work on the idea that you can use any activity at any level if you choose the right material for the activity and you give appropriate support for the activity. This is a challenge for the teacher's professional skill. You should be able to adapt an activity to suit the level of your learners and to even suit the age of your learners. So I think this is a good thing to try and focus on.
Okay. And then we have one here. What advice do you have for applying these techniques for very young learners who are very new to reading?
My first question then would be, can the learners read in their first language already or not? Because if they can, that would affect some of the things that I would do. When we talk about very young, I think it's important to consider the age of whether the learners are older than about 5 or 6 years or younger than 5 or 6 years. If they're younger than 5 or 6 years, then they could be a bit too young to develop phonological awareness. But if they are older than that, then it might be working on phonological awareness would be one of the things I would do. And phonological awareness is simply playing games with the children like this and saying, what word is this? K, a, t. Now notice I'm not saying C-A-T. I'm saying the sound of the word, of the letters, not the name of the letters. and then the child can try to guess what the word is. And okay, let's do another one. D, O, G. Now, what this is doing is teaching the learners to become aware, this is phonological awareness, that words are made up of separate sounds. The next step after this is learning what's called the alphabetic principle, and that is that individual sounds can be represented by letters. Now, these two pieces of knowledge are really important pieces of knowledge when someone begins to read an alphabetic language like English or like Thai. This phonological awareness is really the basis of being able to analyze words into parts and to see how the letters relate to the meaning of the whole. This is not all that's involved in reading, but playing this simple game with young children, I used to play it with my son as we went on a journey in the car or something like that. And then I would get him to do it for me. And it was quite interesting to hear the way that he would divide up a word into sounds. Okay, so that's phonological awareness. And I think it's really important to develop that awareness in very young learners. Then I would be making sure that there are plenty of really interesting books at the right level for them. If you are a learner of English, you are very, very lucky because there are many, many books written within a controlled vocabulary. And so even with a vocabulary as small as about 75 words, there are books that you can start reading in English which are written within that vocabulary. So I would be focusing on extensive reading and making sure that there's a large quantity of really interesting reading to work with, making sure that reading is an enjoyable activity. I'd also be doing the activity of, in New Zealand, we call it shared book. It's sometimes called blown up book or shared reading, where the teacher has a big book and reads the book to the children, and the children can see the big book and they read along with the teacher. The teacher reads it to them, engages them in the stories and answers their questions and asks them to guess what's coming next and so on, and dealing with reading as a kind of interactive activity. So they are some of the things that I would do with young learners for reading.
Okay, and we'll have one last question here. So the comment starts, extensive reading is good for learning vocabulary, but in the classroom, it seems that intensive reading is better, especially for when linked skills activities are called for. Is this true?
No. The reason I say it's not true is that I don't see it being a competition between different kinds of reading. I think that a well-balanced language course should have a large amount of extensive reading, something like about at least, let me think for a minute here, about 1/8 or more of the time in a course should involve extensive reading. But I also think that intensive reading should be a part of a language course too. Extensive reading fits into the meaning-focused input strand of a course. Intensive reading fits into the language-focused learning strand or the deliberate attention strand of a course. I would say that intensive reading should involve about a 1/16, 1/4 of the class time in a language course, and extensive reading about a bit over 1/8 of the time in a language course. And there also should be reading for fluency, so speed reading activities and easy extensive reading as well to build up the reading program. So I don't see them as a competition. It's not a choice between one or the other. I think you need to have both.
All right, thank you very much for answering these questions. Okay, so we're going to get into a quick wrap up here, guys. Thank you again, Paul, for presenting all this useful information to all of these teachers. So for everyone here that joined us today, we do have one more webinar coming up later this month. We'll be going over some tips and strategies for kindergarten class. As well, for those that attended, we do have some other, or if you want to find your certificates for today's attendance, these are the people that you would contact to receive your attendee certificates. So I thank you guys for your patience with getting your certificates. We want to make sure that they're as authentic as possible. So that's why we ask that you kind of make sure to get them through our partners in your guys' country. So these are all the emails here that you can contact. As there are a lot of you, again, I ask for your patience with getting the certificates for you guys. Some will get them quicker, but there is a lot of you, so it might take a little bit of time. I would like you guys as well, if you want more information about future webinars and everything, please follow us on social media. So we do have Facebook and Instagram going, as well as YouTube, where we will be posting this webinar video. So if you do want to review everything that was covered today, we will be posting that within the next few days, and we will be updating that. So be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can view all of our previous webinars as well. And with today's webinar, if there's any feedback that you guys would like to give us, in future, we always take in your feedback, always trying to make our webinars better. Any things that you guys would like for us to do in the future, or any suggestions for webinar topics or something to add to our webinars, we will take that into account. So I believe one of my colleagues will be posting the feedback survey link in the chat. So if you could go ahead and fill that out for us, that would be great. And that will be it for us today. So I'd like to thank Mr. Paul Nation again, Professor Paul Nation. Would that be an okay title for you?
I'm a professor.
Yeah, Professor Paul Nation for joining us today. And thank you guys all. Hope you all are doing well and wherever you are. And we will all see you at the next webinar. Okay. Thank you guys so much, and have a great evening, afternoon, or have a good morning.